just another story of the same, you know, having a good time. Just be respectful, dudes, and never learn. What's up, y'all? Welcome back for another episode of the Baltimore Bureau Podcast. I'm Eze Jackson, here with Dr. Khalilah M. Harris, Esquire, once again.
Get it right every time.
Every time. I'm going to do it every time. All that black girl magic. We need all that.
All right.
This is ceasefire weekend here in Baltimore. If you've been following, we were one of the first to cover the ceasefire last year. Baltimore ceasefire residents have called a 72-hour ceasefire. They started last year, the first weekend of August, and then after that decided to do it quarterly and start the Baltimore ceasefire 365. So that's happening this weekend. I should have a story up Monday on that, but big shout out to all of the organizers and everybody involved in the ceasefire.
Absolutely. You know, ceasefire is you talk about black girl magic. Ceasefire is a magical thing that shows the power of community.
Yeah.
After every ceasefire, we've seen a drastic drop in not only crime, particularly homicide during the weekend of the ceasefire, but following the ceasefire. One of them, it was like 11 days, something like that.
Yeah, it went like 12 days in February.
Yep.
Yeah, with no murders. I think the big thing I love about ceasefire is it's definitely created more empathy from people that I think we were kind of desensitized to murder and crime in the city because you get so used to it.
Just being a part of the narrative.
Yeah, you know what I mean? And you forget that, like, no. Like,
it's not normal.
Yeah, and it's not
and will
normal.
never be normal.
Never, ever. My daughters, two of my daughters' birthdays are this weekend. And I remember last year thinking about it, and it was like, wow. The first time I saw somebody murdered, I was 6 years old. She was turning 6 that weekend. And I was like, I can't imagine now like a world where she would see something like that. You know what I'm saying? So it definitely hit home for me in that aspect, but I think it's done that for a lot of people. You know, just make it real, to make it real.
I want to read this quote. To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time. Happy birthday, James Baldwin.
Happy birthday, James Baldwin. There is an event going on this weekend. Kevin Brown, who I interviewed last week on the Black Arts piece. He heads up the Baldwin Association here. They're doing something here this weekend.
That's dope. I know we've been seeing previews for the Beale Street text coming up for, I want to say, the end of the year. Or actually, no, I think it's coming soon, but looking forward to seeing the film adaptation of that text. And, you know, James Baldwin spoke directly to what we see coming out of the organizers of ceasefire and all the people who are in many ways waking up. I try to refrain from saying people are woke because we all are in different level of consciousness, but you know, you can't turn back after you're awakened to, you know, the things that people around you face every day that you had the privilege of not seeing or not being a part of. And, you know, the narrative of Baltimore, you know, Baltimore, Murderland, as some will say, you know, they're quick to quote The Wire. But the fact is, hundreds of thousands of people live here and actually don't experience that as an everyday part of their lives. And we all are responsible for tuning in and being conscious of what's happening around us because we own this city. This is our city.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, even me, as much as I try not to forget, like, where I come from, you know, where I grew up and all that stuff, there are moments where you're reminded, you have to be reminded, you got to pay attention. You know, I was talking to two brothers a few weeks ago, 19 and 20, and I asked them why they felt like they needed to carry a gun. And the response immediately was like, do you know where we live? Like, he talked to me like as if, you know.
Something wrong with you?
Yeah, but in reality, I do. I'm not around that. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of people that are not around that kind of, you know, that everyday reality. Like, there's a lot of people living in the city doing really positive things and living, you know, positive lives, but we can't ignore the fact that this is happening right in our backyard, right under our noses. So Salute to Erica Bridgeford, Ogun, and all of the organizers of Ceasefire, the Trees Gant. Y'all are doing an awesome job. Keep up the good work. I'll see y'all out there this weekend. We got some good stories this week. You interview Jose Wilson?
Vilson.
Jose Vilson.
Jose Vilson.
From Educolor.
Educolor.
About this LeBron school, which I'm so excited about. Like, he did that, and I was dope. Like, let's go.
It's dope. It's dope. Had a conversation with Jose Vilson. He's a national organizer. He's founder of Educolor. He's a classroom teacher. So, you know, sometimes you have people talking about education. They haven't been in the classroom for a minute. They don't understand the implications of having teacher protections. We'll talk about that later in the show. Right. Strong unions, family engagement, culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy, and Jose and the Educolor movement, which I organized with as well, full disclosure, have, you know, really been doing yeoman's work to make sure all education spaces are talking about the issues that are relevant to all kids in public schools and in schooling in general. And we talked about the LeBron School. Also went out and visited William Penderhughes Elementary Middle's Freedom School, because what LeBron did is a community school. Right. And so people are like, wow, how do we do this in other places? Well, there are other places where it's happening. Yeah. We will happily take an NBA star to fully fund community schools being anchors of communities and wrapping around the entire community, right? So that you don't have a situation where you are pouring funds into a school and children are getting one version of reality at school, but then they walk outside of the school and their families are not being supported in the same way, or the assets of the community are not being lifted up in a way that he's trying to do, like soup to nuts. Listen, if you just ride this out, you do your best, you commit. And when I say you, he means the entire family, like your block even. If you all are with me, I am with you. And we're going to ride this thing out until you go to college or you don't go to college. You know, you become a master tradesman of some sort, or you are programming the next thing, right? That we all are going to be using 10 years from now when artificial intelligence takes over. Like, I got you all the way through. And, you know, the fact that he did it as a traditional public school as well is something that we talk about here, that you don't have to pull outside of the system, that there's some level of responsibility to pour into systems that are intended to be safety nets for all children whose families may not have the wherewithal to pluck them out and move them somewhere else. So.
All right, well, let's check this out.
I'm Dr. Khalilah Harris for the Real News Network. On Monday, July 30th, LeBron James of the Lakers, along with the LeBron James Family Foundation, the University of Akron, and Akron Public Schools announced the opening of LeBron's I Promise Academy.
Kids just want to know if we care about them. They have the dreams, they have the aspirations, they have everything that they can actually get to whatever they want to get to in life. They just want to know that someone cares.
I'm here with Jose Vilson, math educator in New York City, national board certified teacher, author, and founder of the Educolor movement. Welcome, Jose.
Thank you for having me.
You posted a tweet on Twitter after hearing about the founding of I Promise School, saying, a day after the latest LeBron James decision, and while I'm appreciative of James's move, I struggle to celebrate when it shouldn't take an athlete of James' stature and status to get an amazing institution and learning for our most marginalized kids. Will you talk a little bit about what you meant by that tweet? What caused you to say something like that?
Well, what we know about NBA athletes these days is that, unlike in previous generations, this latest set of NBA stars has come from mostly middle to upper class upbringing, or they were given a bevy of opportunities to be able to get better at this thing we call basketball. LeBron James is that prototypical poor black boy who came from the hood, who had the struggles that he came up with, and like he is just a phenomenal athlete. And so you have like these really, really slim odds of a gentleman such as LeBron James coming up from the ranks, and then all of a sudden he's the best player in the world, right? But yet through that hard work and all that other stuff, because he's able to acclimate all this fortune, he has to create a school for his hometown in order for that hometown of Akron to feel like they have an institution that they can actually dedicate their students to. And unfortunately, that shouldn't be the responsibility of somebody who's amassed all this fortune, who's, you know, worked hard to get to where he's at. And it really ought to be a societal investment. And unfortunately, we haven't seen a societal investment yet. Instead, we have folks who are either big philanthropists or celebrities or athletes to come in and say, we're going to create a situation for a select number of kids to be able to have this good fortune rain upon them.
Right. We heard Sean Carter, otherwise known as Jay-Z, saying something very similar to you, where he pointed out that it's not the requirement of affluent celebrities or athletes to be doing this work, that we all have to do our part. Will you talk a little bit more about what you think it will take for every child to have access to a quality school, like the opportunities that are being offered at I Promise?
Frankly, we're going to need a whole redistribution of what we consider wealth. When you have the largest, you have one of the largest countries, you have one of the most affluent countries in the entire world, where you look at any number of the top 10, top 100, top 1,000 money makers in the world, and you see Americans all through it. And yet there's all this inequity. You have a huge stratification between what we consider the poor and the rich. And then across, you know, you look at the alignment between class and race, class and gender, and you start seeing to yourself, wow, there are really big systemic things that ought to be cleaned up in order for us to actually get the schools that all of our children, especially our most marginalized, deserve. It would obviously start with how we consider our school funding formulas. It shouldn't take a thing like a Title I, for example, a federal grant, which, by the way, is not necessarily guaranteed to all of our schools, in order for us to get even a semblance of what we consider equity, right? We need to really reconsider the whole redistribution of funds and wealth in our country and start right from the top and say, hey, like, we're going to create a situation where everyone needs to pay more than their fair share in order to make sure that everything is equitable. Will everybody be able to bend to that? Not necessarily, but I think with mass movement, I think that is more than probable. I think it's likely, once we get enough people to realize that, hey, the things that we invest in are the things that we will be able to actually get out of. So it can't just be LeBron James saying, like, let's create a school. It's like, no, everybody is able to create the school, and it's institutional. It's a thing that our whole country believes in. But that's obviously also going to be tied to things like racial attitudes, racial biases, and any number of systemic inequities that we can point to really pretty immediately.
So I organize with the Educolor movement. You're the founder of the Educolor movement. You use social media, and the movement was really founded in the midst of social media to talk about some of what you just described: educational equity, institutional equity, providing families and students with the types of opportunities we believe are required for them to, you know, live their best lives and have a quality education. Will you talk a little bit more about the use of social media to kind of expand the ideas about providing all students with high quality schools?
What's critical about the Educolor movement is that it really did start with just a handful of people saying, we don't feel welcome on a racial level in any number of spaces, right? So there were spaces where we wanted to be activated, whether it be education activism, in our own schools, in our unions, any number of spaces where the 4 or 5 of us just said, wow, we just don't feel welcome at all. Even though our voices are valuable, we weren't getting the proper treatment. So when we came together to discuss these issues, it was a sense of like relief. Like, there are more than one of us who really believes in educational equity and wants to do it from a very critical intersectional lens. And that's really important to point out, that it isn't just about class. It's any number of factors that are intertwined with class, whether it be race, gender, etc. Educolor then became the space for everybody to have these difficult conversations and to have them from a critical lens with the foundation of empathy, social justice, and resistance and support. Like, these are things that were foundational. It wasn't just like it came forth because Twitter said so. It was very much like, no, actually, we are folks who are doing the work in our spaces, and we want to be able to create even more spaces for people to have conversations, but then also activate in these spaces. Being able to then talk back about any number of things, whether it be how we reorganize unions to discuss racial inequity, how we create public policy to make sure that all of our students are served, specifically our Black kids, our brown kids, our Muslim kids, any number of students who feel like they are marginalized from what we would consider white, cis, hetero, normative situations, wealthy situations. We need to be able to talk back about that. It isn't that we're just giving whatever the wealthy have to what the poor have. It's like, no, actually, we want to create conditions where we have enough resources that will create agency and pedagogy and equity for the people who need it the most.
Great. And Jose, you're a classroom teacher. You talk about equity. You talk about how unions should be working for not only students, but for its members. It's of note that the I Promise School is a public school. It is not an independent school. It is not a charter school. What are your thoughts on that? And what should we learn from that as we try to replicate models possibly based on I Promise?
What it seems to me is that lately there's been a lot of discussion around whether or not charter schools versus our public schools. And obviously we know that there's a big nuance between those conversations. You have spaces like in Baltimore where every school would be considered charter, but you have foundations who say, well, we don't really like the ones in Baltimore because they function more like public schools because they still have the hand of the state and local governments being able to have some sort of accountability. And so when I look at any number of celebrities who started charter schools at the peak of education reform post-2000, I would say anywhere between 2002 to 2015, those celebrities said, we're just going to create a school because we can, and it's all well and good, and we can pull money from the district, and we can pull money from any number of hedge fund managers and investors and just say, hey, we got this. We don't need the district to be informed about what we do. The move towards public seems to be more, I guess, it's a little bit more revolutionary even, because you're almost saying hey, I'm LeBron James and I believe in public function, and I'm actually going to invest in public function. I want that sort of level of accountability for the school that I want to create. And if I can do it, I'm pretty much putting everybody else who said that they want to pull away from district to shame. So there is something to be said for somebody who says, I believe in all these public functions and I want everybody else to follow what I'm doing, because there is a public element that needs to be in this. Yes, I can very much create my own set of charter schools because, I've been at MVP. I've won gold medals around the world. I'm one of the most famous athletes ever. And yet and still, he says there is something to be said for creating a democratic good. Being able to come together and say, hey, this is the type of school that we need to create for every single body. And I will be willing to do my part and bring more people to do their part for the kids who are the most marginalized. That is such a critical element. Instead of just saying, we're going to pull money from districts, we're going to pull our kids away and only give it to a certain select number of kids. It's almost like he's saying, yeah, maybe that could be part of the thing that I'm doing, but it's more like I want to be able to invest in every single body that's here in Akron, and I'll be able to do that with any number of your supports. And if everybody else can just follow my lead, then maybe we can actually start doing things more institutionally and think about what it means to create a democratic space for all of our students and all of our schools.
Dope.
First of all, I love Jose. I love having any conversation where I can quote Jay-Z. So, I was like the ancient philosopher Sean Carter also notes. And, Jay did say something dope, which is, they were interviewing him in the New York Times about the Trayvon Martin history and how that launched the Black Lives Matter movement. And speaking of, when I was running a school, I remember my kids doing a walkout and marching across Pratt Street after Trayvon was killed. And so it resonates so deeply. But what Sean says is, what Jay says is, I know him. We don't go way back to Brooklyn, but what Jay-Z says is, it's not incumbent on any celebrity to do what LeBron did or to do the things that he's doing. Instead, it's incumbent on all of us to lead from where we sit, right? And if we're waiting on that person or those people to step up, we're going to be waiting forever.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure. I had a mentor, John Reed. He was executive vice president at 1199 SEIU when I used to work there. Shout out to SEIU. But John Reed used to always say, the way you change the world is you clean up your corner. And if your corner starts looking sparkly, then the guy across the street is going to feel bad because his corner looks like trash.
That's it.
And then, you know, and then you start that wave effect. I think a lot of times we forget that there's little things that we can do right in our lives.
And really, you know, white supremacy and institutional oppression tells us to wait on somebody else to fix things for us. Because if we start fixing things, you will see, and you kind of see that now again when we just recalling James Baldwin, Ashe, when people are conscious and they start making demands on the systems that are supposed to support them, that system will try to tighten its rein or collapse in on them. And, you know, when you see people who are really pushing in and wanting to practice self-determination and be a part of society and say, you know, this is my block, these are my schools, and this is going to be a good school because we say so. And now we invite you, school district, to join us in making this a good school because according to our taxes, that's your job. And you see people getting real nervous, right? You see people, you know, we see this in the race for governor with Ben Jealous and Larry Hogan. The commercials against Jealous are wild. You would think that, you know, polls were saying Jealous was ahead by 10 points with the commercials that have come out that are, you know.
Yeah, but they can't let go of that power.
Nah.
Man, that power is something else. It's kind of indicative in this next piece, too, about police reform that Taya Graham did. Shout out Taya Graham. On police reform, rhetoric without action is meaningless. Advocates say efforts to reform the troubled Baltimore Police Department are flailing because the city is not implementing real change. Let's check this out.
This is Taya Graham reporting for the Real News Network in Baltimore City, Maryland. A series of meetings have brought up a critical issue. Can one of our country's most troubled police departments be reformed?
Number one, the perimeter was held for too long. The threat of an armed and dangerous suspect was dispelled within 36 hours.
It was another blow for the reputation of the Baltimore City Police Department, already beset by high rates of violent crime.
The perimeter was held for an extra 3 days. And during those 3 days, people's freedom to travel was restricted.
A scathing assessment from the oversight group tasked with monitoring the consent decree between the Baltimore City Police and the Department of Justice. The decree was intended to ensure reforms were implemented after a Justice Department investigation found that the police department practiced unconstitutional and racist policing. But even under the decree, the monitor found that when Detective Sean Suter suffered a fatal gunshot wound in a West Baltimore alley, the department used unconstitutional tactics to lock down the Harlem Park neighborhood where the shooting occurred for over a week.
In addition, by stopping people during the course of, as the perimeter was being held, and taking people's liberty away, even for a few minutes, was inappropriate because they had no reasonable suspicion that these people were committing crimes. They weren't asking these people if they had knowledge about the shooters, the Suter shooting. They were simply stopping them in order to protect a crime scene that was a small vacant lot, but they were saying that they needed an area that was 6 square blocks, really almost an entire residential neighborhood, to do it.
Their assessment was damning. But their report was not the only recent criticism of Baltimore police that raises questions about reform.
And until the action matches the rhetoric is utterly and completely meaningless.
Inside the federal courthouse, Judge James K. Bredar, who's overseeing the consent decree, also expressed concerns about a culture resistant to oversight.
The judge seemed skeptical about the culture inside the department and said, you know, the culture had to change. And he was asking about it. Can you change the culture?
Absolutely. There has to be, and I've said it before, there has to be a cultural shift at some point. You know, you talk about cultural change or turning it around. I don't believe in turning it around because to me that sort of implies that you're making a 360. You'll be going back in the same direction.
Telling city officials he felt the department had to change from within. But he also emphasized the need to increase civilian oversight of police, including a recent controversy involving the Civilian Review Board, when the city solicitor Andre Davis asked members to sign a non-disclosure agreement. The ACLU says it was an affront to transparency the department has lacked and a misinterpretation of the law.
Here again, we see a disconnect between rhetoric and action. It's wonderful to hear the city solicitors say that laws need to be changed to increase transparency. We agree, and we have been working for years to change them, unlike the city of Baltimore.
But Davis says he's actually complying with it and that the board needs real power to succeed.
There's been a lot of criticism of that non-disclosure agreement with the Civilian Review Board. How do you respond to that? Because people are saying it's kind of cracking down when you should be opening up the process.
You know, I don't know where this agitation came from, but the non-disclosure requirements are in the law. They're right there in the law. And so there's some frustration, and I appreciate the frustration. But as I said in court, and as I said to the board the other night, the way they do their work is completely consistent with the requirements of non-disclosure.
An unlikely prospect in a legislature that this year added mandatory sentences for gun possession and beat back efforts to add civilians to the internal police disciplinary board.
Do you feel like you can make those changes, legislative changes in Annapolis that the judge was asking you to? I mean, I watched it last year. No, it was tough. But do you have any better sense that maybe this time they'll allow the civilians and in terms of negotiations?
You know, if Speaker Bush and President Mike Miller see the needs that Baltimore City feels so deeply, they'll make change. They'll see that change happens.
For now, Commissioner Tuggle says he can change the city police.
And ensure that the tone, that philosophical tone that I talked about earlier, has to permeate at all times, not just in good times, but in times of crisis.
But many who attended the hearing say the question is how.
She was well. The mayor has said she is committed to implementing civilians on hearing boards. That's wonderful. But let's not forget that the so-called final offer that she submitted to the FOP for a new contract did not have civilians on trial board.
This is Taya Graham and Stephen Janis reporting for the Real News Network in Baltimore City, Maryland.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, case in point of what you're talking about. You know, I mean, here is a very powerful police department that since the events of 2015, the uprising, Freddie Gray's death, the department has been under a lot of scrutiny. You got the consent decree happening. All eyes are on the police department. Mm-hmm. We've had now two, I think the third commissioner, the interim commissioner just recently got pulled on tax stuff. You got the gun trace task force earlier this year, all indicted in federal charges. Detective Sean Suter murdered, still no answers on his death. And the public is saying, okay, y'all keep talking about police reform, but
where are the reforms?
Where's
what
the
should
reform?
We be seeing?
You got the same people in there. You got the same structures going on, and really, it's one of the most obvious examples of a powerful group trying their best to hold on to that power. And
then you see Baltimore City Solicitor Andre Davis, former U.S. District Court judge, former state level judge. So he knows the system very well when it comes to the legal system. And then he's asking the Police Oversight Board to sign non-disclosure agreements, right? And it's like, who do you represent? In this moment? Are you here to protect the city? Are you here to protect citizens? Are you here to protect the police? Like, what is your role? And we saw that very heated discussion covered where members of the board were pretty much saying, you know, lack of transparency is a part of this police culture that allows for an agency to overspend unchecked, allows for that same overspending resulting in overtime hours, yet we see increases in crime. And
$47 million in overtime.
Right, right. And so, you know, it all gets muddied, right? Because we know that crime is actually down. Homicide is down from this point last year. But when you don't see an overarching change in culture, which is what the judge was saying here, right? How can you actually change the culture, or will people be on their best behavior so you know, they aren't held accountable in a way that they ought to be, to have sustained change in culture and relationship with the community? So, you know.
Yeah, it's wild. This next story, Darna Noor, who's not with us today. Hey, Darna.
Take your vacation, girl.
Take your day off, boo. She be working hard.
Yep.
Darna's been doing a really good job of covering climate change stuff as far as it relates to Baltimore. And this next piece is, can Baltimore take on big oil? Let's check it out.
There's little doubt of the consequences of climate change, but with the federal government outright denying the science, some cities are fighting back. One of them is Baltimore. Recently, the city filed a lawsuit against major oil companies for knowingly contributing to the catastrophic consequences of climate change. There's vast scientific consensus that we need to drastically lower our use of oil and other fossil fuels to avoid mass species die-off, sea level rise, and other irreversible effects. This suit targets 26 oil companies, including Shell, ExxonMobil, and Chevron. And Baltimore is not alone. About a dozen other cities have tried to advance the same legal strategy and have faced challenges in doing so. To see why Baltimore thinks we have a chance, I'm joined by the person who will be heading the city's effort, Baltimore City Solicitor Andre Davis. Thanks so much for coming in today, sir.
Glad to be with you.
So I want to start by asking you about the motivations for this suit. Where did this idea come from, and what are you hoping to accomplish?
The aim here is to seek compensation to the city from the consequences of climate change. The fossil fuel companies have known for decades of the catastrophic consequences of their market approach, their business model, and we don't believe it's fair or equitable for the taxpayers of Baltimore City to incur and bear all the costs that will be consequences of their business model. So we're seeking to seek compensation and have them bear some of the costs of their businesses.
Right. And what's at stake for Baltimore? Talk a little bit about what kinds of effects we can expect that climate change would cause in a city like this.
Well, we're seeing the effects even as we sit here. The dramatic changes in weather patterns, extreme heat. Fortunately, unlike California, we don't face the prospect of ever-growing forest fires, grass fires, but we do have significant effects. The sea rise level is a direct threat to Fells Point, one of our greatest assets here in the city. There's no question that the building of seawalls in coastal cities like Baltimore will begin to take on greater importance. That will incur costs. The effects on our sewer and water infrastructure are likely to be enormous. They already are.
Certainly.
As most people know, we've entered into a consent decree with the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Justice. So there are untold costs that we have yet to precisely calculate, but we know that they will be enormous for years to come.
Now, you filed this suit just a day after New York City's at a federal level was actually rejected. Why? Why did you choose to move forward with the suit anyway?
We respectfully believe that the federal courts, and there have been two so far, that have dismissed the claims similar to those brought in our case, that those decisions were incorrectly decided. And it's a little technical, but the effort that we are about to make is to try to convince the courts that we are really relying on state law, not on federal law, which is the decision that was made in the New York case and in the California case. Those judges viewed the matter as only concerning federal law. And we, as explicitly as we can, have tried to make it clear in our pleadings, and we will when the matter goes before the judges. We want to make it clear that we are not relying on any federal law, statutory or otherwise. We are relying exclusively on Maryland law. And we are hopeful that those arguments will be heard, fully understood, and that they will carry the day.
All right. We see City Solicitor Andre Davis again, you know, trying to really position Baltimore to get some recompense, right? That he says clearly this is not about Baltimore City, which is an issue with what the judge was saying. This is not about Baltimore City trying to itself use a lawsuit to address climate change. And as some of the other cases have been around the country that have been dismissed, where judges have said, or the most recent case where the federal judge said, you know, this needs to be addressed by Congress or the executive branch. It's not for the court system to address, which is nonsensical because we have 3 branches of government and not 2. Right. But he's saying him filing the suit despite that case being dismissed, yet another case being dismissed against Big Oil, is really about compensation for the harms that those organizations have done. It's not to excuse the demand that people placed on these oil companies for their product. It is to say that these companies, in many ways, participated in a system that fueled that demand, and they knew the outcomes of what the oil was doing, the product was doing to the environment, and then would use their corporate power and their vast amounts of money to continue to fuel the demand for their product, no pun intended. And so this was a really good conversation where, you know, I'd like to see how it goes, because it is a different take. You know, I put my lawyer hat on. It is a different take legally to say, you know, I'm not asking you to do something about, I'm not asking you to reduce emissions. I'm not asking you to make climate policy through this lawsuit. Just show me some coin for what they've done to us. Right.
About the damage that you've done.
You've done damage, and there are things we can do to now mitigate the damage that was done. Build seawalls around Fells Point and low-lying areas, as well as fixing the infrastructure. We're under consent decree for that as well, not just around the police, but consent decree to fix the aging infrastructure, 100 years old, so that when we have the effects of climate change, we've seen this summer, the amount of rain and flooding in the area is like we've never seen before. Okay, Big Oil, do what you need to do to show that you are good citizens, since apparently corporations are people too. Show us some empathy and pay your fair share for the damage you've done.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to see what lengths capitalism is willing to go for the dollar. You know, it's like, you look at oil, you look at tobacco, you know, all of these companies and industries that were built to supply a need while at the same time understanding they're going to damage somebody. They're going to damage somebody. And it's just like, it's almost like it's fine. Like, it's just a casualty of war. Let's get this money.
And it's so interesting that people, you know, I think this is a big tension, because the way the American dream is being sold is less now these days about living your best life with your family, making sure everybody's fed, making sure people can pursue their dreams and that kind of thing. It's all about who can be rich, right? And therefore policy is made, and people say, without blinking an eye, you know, well, this needs to be a warm environment for business. Why? What's your reason? Just so people can make money? Because if you're not saying so that can fuel an economy that supports people living their best lives, which they try to throw that in, it really is about, you should not be able to obstruct me from making as much money as possible.
Right.
Hard stop. If you do anything that obstructs me from making as much money as possible, you are un-American. Right? And that is so un-American. Right? And, you know, we don't seem to get to that point in conversations. We know that there is a lot of conversation about Russian hacking and, you know, Stormy Daniels when it comes to the guy at 1600. But really, there are specific policies, particularly out of the Environmental Protection Association, administration, excuse me, that are reducing some of the policies related to pollution and the environment and climate. And those aren't the things being covered by corporate media.
Not at all.
Or mainstream media. And we need to be having those conversations because, you know, if people don't want to live in the matrix, robots have come and, you know, we're about to go up above the robots and see that the climate has been completely destroyed if we don't pay attention.
Yeah.
And this next piece is, you know, kind of along the same lines where Darna Noor again is talking about Maryland's report card on renewable energy.
Yeah.
And, you know, one would think, particularly with what we want to do for the Chesapeake Bay, that we have much better policy, but apparently not.
We do not. Let's check this out.
Maryland is sometimes touted as an environmental leader, but the state's renewable energy policy was just given a failing grade. A new study from Food and Water Watch assessed 29 states' renewable portfolio standards, which set goals for renewable energy sold in each state and define what counts as renewable. Maryland's RPS standards subsidize 5 energy sources, which Food and Water Watch considered dirty. So joining me to talk about this is Patrick Woodall, the research director at Food and Water Watch, who worked extensively on this report. Thanks for coming on today, Patrick.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So before we get into the specifics of the report, what exactly are these renewable portfolio standards, or RPSs? Where did they come from and how exactly do they work?
So they're state energy policies which direct utilities to source or generate a portion of their energy from renewable sources, but they also set the definitions of what counts as renewable. All the policies count wind and solar, but others count a huge number of what we think of as dirty renewables, which are combustion-based. They include garbage incinerators, waste methane from landfills, and things like that. So those two elements, the target as well as what is in the portfolio itself, establish what the policies do. And generally, these are policies that have an enormous potential. About 50% of the renewable energy that's come online since 2000 have been attributable to the state renewable energy portfolio standards. But obviously, they could be a lot better. The national average goal is about 25% renewable energy, and obviously that target needs to be up to 100 so that we can really move to the climate curbing policies that we need, and we need to expel the dirty energy sources from these renewable portfolios.
And what exactly were your criteria? What's considered dirty, and how exactly did you come up with these grades? I mean, Maryland and 6 other states got failing grades.
Sure, and the reason that Maryland got a failing grade is because it has a pretty terrible target. It aims to get 25% renewable by 2025, and we know that we need to be on a much more accelerated goal than that. We need to have 100% renewable by wind and solar and geothermal and tidal energy alone. It has a very dirty portfolio standard. It has 5 of the 6 things that we considered are dirty energies, 5 of the 7 things. And it has a very slow transition to wind and solar power. And part of that is because you have you allow a lot of dirty energy sources to count as renewable, and that makes it harder to create the incentives you need to get real clean renewable power. So we looked at kind of 3 things: what the goal was, whether it was hitting 100% renewable energy, what was the mix of energy sources, and then what their transition target and was projected to be for wind, solar, and geothermal alone. And on all of these areas, Maryland fell far short and was worse than the average in almost every case. So it's their target is 25%. The national average of the states we looked at was 30%. They have 5 dirties, and most states have 4 dirty energy sources. So, and Maryland has they count burning wood as clean energy. They count burning garbage and poultry litter as renewable energy. They count waste methane from landfills and factory farms as renewable. They count this paper milling byproduct called black liquor, burning that as renewable. And they also include these renewable energy credits, which we think are a bad component of these policies and should be phased out or eliminated for all the states that have them. So on those metrics, I mean, Maryland's RPS program is pretty weak, and right now it generates more than half of its power from coal and natural gas. The majority of its renewable power, so-called renewable power, is currently coming, the leading source of renewable power is garbage incineration. And so you have these garbage incinerators, which are huge emitters of carbon dioxide and climate gases, but also air pollutants that are very dangerous and public health threats. And most of these garbage incinerators are in lower income and communities of color. So they have a serious effect on the most pollution burdened communities in the state. So these are big problems, but they're all counted as renewable. And that's definitely problematic. Maryland needs to get rid of these dirty sources and increase its goal.
So just, yeah, along the same lines, like, Donna's doing, I gotta say it again, like she's doing really well bringing a lot of this stuff to light because, one, I didn't realize that Maryland was like supposed to be a leader, you know, on environmental issues.
Yep.
But then when she, you know, this, all of the work she's doing and looking at this incinerator and all that, like it's so fascinating because it's happening right there and we don't even, most of us are not even paying attention to it.
Right. Mark Steiner and I did a panel last weekend about this very issue, and Darna's going to be putting a piece forward about that as well. But, you know, when it boils down to it, sometimes advocates need to move out of the jargon and bring things down to everyday people's realities. Like, how does this impact you?
Yeah.
You know, there's a reason your baby has lead poisoning. There's a reason your kid, you're seeing a lot of eczema in your community. There's a reason your grandbaby has asthma.
Asthma, yeah.
You know, and it's not because it's genetic, right? It's because of the environment around you.
Yeah.
So I need you to come out and help push elected officials to do something about these things and really bringing it down so people understand how their day-to-day is being impacted by poor climate or climate change or environmental issues, you know, is going to be critical because we do need people to be engaged such that they can demand policies that support their lives.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned Mark Steiner. He's got a piece up here for this week.
Yep. So he's talking to the head of the Maryland State Education Association, the newly elected chair. And again, we talked at the top of the show about strong schools and strong traditional public schools being supported by strong unions. And, you know, they talk about how the Janus decision is really something that is bringing together a long decades battle for strong or reducing the power of unions. And Cheryl talks about how the MSEA is going to be working under her leadership to keep our teachers' union strong in the state of Maryland. And it's very interesting. Let's listen to the conversation between Mark and Cheryl.
And as we've been covering and watching the news, you saw the results of what happened on the Supreme Court with Janus versus AFSCME, which kind of gutted public service unions in this country in terms of allowing employees to back out of paying union dues and more. And it was a horrendous decision, but really a decision that is part of a 30-year effort to dismember unions and to destroy the power unions had. It's a complex matter inside unions and out. And here in Maryland, where we're broadcasting from, as in many other states, we're wrestling with how to fund schools. There's a thing called the Kirwan Commission, which every state almost has their equivalent to the Kirwan Commission, wrestling with how to fund their schools and where the money comes from and what we expect of our schools. And we've seen the strikes all across this country, West Virginia, Oklahoma, in places people did not think teachers would walk out, and they walked out. So what does all that mean for the future? Well, today we are joined by the newly elected president of the Maryland State Education Association, which represents most of the teachers in Maryland, Cheryl Boast. And Cheryl, welcome. Good to have you on the program.
Thank you for having me.
So where do we begin? Let's begin with you. So let's take a little just about yourself before we get into some of the heart of the issues nationally and locally and around education. You've been a school teacher for how long?
This is the beginning of my 30th year teaching.
30 years?
Yes.
Would you start when you were 10?
Yes.
That's what I thought.
Yes.
So, and you taught at in a Baltimore County school.
Yes.
You were president of the Teachers Association of Baltimore County, called
Yes.
TAPCO. But you taught at a school in Essex the state wanted to take over.
Correct.
Essex being a small community on the east side of Baltimore County, very working class district in our state. So talk a bit about that experience, the battle around closing, having your school being taken over.
Sure. Well, I came here from Pittsburgh after graduating and was placed at Mars Estates Elementary School. And I heard for a long time, oh, you're in a tough school. You're in a challenging school. 70% of our students live below the poverty line. 6 out of 10 started the year and then ended the year at a different school. So you often saw your attendance book go on forever. But I have to say, it gave me the most rewards teaching at that challenging school. Students had trauma, had needs, and several years into it, the state did want to come in and take us over based on test scores. All they looked at is test scores. And we joined with the community, and we said, no, we're not going to let that happen. We came up with an alternative plan.
Who's the we who said this?
Well, we all got together, the staff, and we even had some support at the central office level in Baltimore County, because Baltimore County did not want their first school to be taken over by the state of Maryland.
Right.
And we knew we had a lot of potential. It's a school that is challenging, but people stay for 30 years because we have such a connection to the community and the need. So in our school with such need, we said, no, we're going to do things a little bit differently. And we had the opportunity to do a needs assessment where they asked us, the people in the classrooms, what do your students need? What will turn around this school? And we did turn it around because we received extra social workers to really deal with the student and the family, not just when they come into our doors to learn. School counselors to deal with trauma and the things that our students were seeing. We even had a local bar offer bicycles and other things for raffles to get parents to come in. We visited churches. We offered after-school programs and summer camps. I started a summer camp in connection with the YMCA. So we really did a lot of outreach. And within a few years, because it can't be done in 1 year, unfortunately, too many reforms look at 1 year.
Right.
But after a few years of this commitment and really buy-in from the community, we turned the school around. We closed the achievement gap between black and white students. Suspensions were lowered, and the school climate really did improve. It became a community school. We worked with the police athletic league that was on our property. And so then it became a school where everybody wanted to come. But we still had the poverty, but we showed with lower class sizes and these supports. And that really is what I think is missing in education, and that's why I'm happy to become the new president, so to give our educators a voice, because we used our voice to make a change, and I think that's what's missing today.
A lot of action this week.
Yeah.
Baltimore Bureau.
Yeah. We're all over the place. Yep. I love that Mark always keeps the pulse and brings the conversation back to unions. As I said before, like by my early adulthood, a decade I spent being a union organizer. And man, they really did a number on us in this country by shutting down the unions. And it's unfortunate, like the unions, some of them did it themselves. You know what I'm saying? Like that's the even worse part about it is, like Reaganomics and everybody, the conservatives, they wanted to smash the unions anyway, but then the greed within the unions has given
they made it possible, made it more possible, and created a green field for that kind of demise to come forward.
Yeah, to the point where now working people have little power.
People take for granted also, working class folk, middle class folk, many people take for granted some of the things that they have as a part of their working conditions are only because unions fought for it.
Oh, yeah.
But there has to be that balance of unions being strong and protecting people's rights, but also innovating for the culture we're in now.
Yeah.
Even if we talk about schools, sometimes unions have not been a friend to innovation. Right? On the flip side, sometimes market-based reformers lambast the unions as, outmoded, outdated, unwilling to innovate. And those are the same, different sides of the same coin, when in fact the union membership, teachers, right, are all for innovation and all for making sure all kids have access to equitable education. So you, in the talking heads, you kind of miss the work of the everyday folk on the ground.
Yeah.
And then you see things like, well, you don't have to pay union dues. Okay, well, let's see what happens in the next 3 to 5 years when you're complaining about X, Y, and Z, and you really want to have interdisciplinary planning, and you want to be able to have more planning periods during the day and those kinds of things, and how amenable some of these Dems in name only, as we see in the state of Maryland and in other places where we see teachers organizing and making demands on their legislature for fair pay and for fair working conditions, how easy that is when you don't have the resources to do it, or the union is the power of the union is stripped, such that their ability to really push for what is fair is limited.
Yeah, shout out to the teachers and healthcare workers. I feel like as far as unions go, they are
holding it down.
And the janitors, service workers, I think, are really holding it down. I mean, people don't understand how much having a union helps you. I talk to, I got some relatives that are correctional officers. You talk to them and it's like they complain about working too many hours.
Right.
You know what I mean? And then you go, well, don't y'all got a union? And they go,
right.
You know what I mean?
I guess we do. I don't know what they do for me.
But that's all that's all by design, because really the union is indicative of its membership a lot of times. The more active you have the membership, the more engaged the membership is, the more powerful the union is. You know what I mean? So if you have a union that kind of intentionally has set up this culture where the members are not engaged and they can negotiate with the employer directly and say, all right, well, this is what we're going to do for the members. And then it's like,
it falls apart. And again, to the top of the show, this is what Jose was saying about how, you have union members saying we need to be leading on culturally relevant and responsive teaching practices, but inside the union, you don't even want to use words like race or black people, and so you got to be thoughtful of from where your power comes, right? And, it's going to be critical going forward because we have a battle. People are waking up.
For sure. And there's much work to do. The Real News will be here covering that work as long as y'all give us some money. So I'm so bad at fundraising, but I always like to try this at the end. But yes, send us money. We only exist because you care and you support us. We don't take any corporate funding or do any advertising. So give to the Real News Network. We just finished a successful fundraising campaign. So thank you to everybody who donated. If you haven't, please do so. Big thanks to our studio gurus, Stephen Frank, Dwayne Gladden, Dave Hebden. As always, holding us down back there.
Jocelyn Dombrowski.
Shout out to Jocelyn Dombrowski, who is taking our photos every week. And we're talking about unions. She is also the woman leading the charge for our union here that we're putting together here at The Real News. Shout out to her. And thank you all for listening. I think